Loving your library there, Simon. That is super nifty.
Yeah, when I was doing an interview with them, I was like reading some of the titles there. I was like, oh yeah, I know that one. And even though I can't read, I can recognize like the spine of the books. Well, you got some doubles in there to Fungal Pharmacy. I think I think that's a great thing. It's like have a double, like when a book is that good, you just never know, right? You lend it to somebody or you just kind of wear through that first copy and to have that backup of a second, I think is a wise thing.
Yeah. I don't know if people are watching, but this is what I did last time too. I'm still looking for there's a copy of this somewhere out there. It's got blue writing in the first page and it's dedicated to me. So I lent that to somebody.
Right.
And I'm hoping that the universe somehow brings it back to me or whatever, because that's one of my prize favorites.
Yeah, totally. Especially, the story you shared, the connection that you have with her too.
This one's pretty cool.
Oh,
Paul Stamets' first book.
Wow.
And it's from
that's like original publication right there.
Yeah, it's from Gary Linkoff's personal library.
Wow. Nice. Good find. Yeah, I bet you there's some real gems on there. Thanks to this, like show and tell. That's great. I see that giant lichens back there. I know Robert Rogers said one of his newest books is going to be all about lichens. It's going to expand that section of fungal pharmacy into its own book.
Yeah, it's trippy that we're still scratching the surface of the whole mycoverse, let alone, oh, wait a second, now there's the lycoverse.
Yeah. Okay, Cass says that they have a skirt with the same print on it as your t-shirt, I imagine.
Yeah, I was thinking it's funny too. Candace has this hoodie, so I thought she'd get a kick out of. I didn't realize that until later that she's got the same hoodie.
Well, fungi's we like to match. Yes,
she's my mushroom sister, that's for sure.
Yeah, right on.
Okay, right on. Well, we're right at 7 p.m. here, so you think we should give Simon a little introduction here, Malcolm?
Yeah, for sure.
We're very excited for day 2 of the Mushroom Symposium. Tonight, each night is fantastic. So, of course, our presenter, is Simon. And Simon, of course, is producing some of the neatest mushroom tinctures in North America. We actually have a few of his tinctures in the shop, Malcolm?
Yeah.
So there's Simon's Lion's Mane tincture. He's got a few really nifty, he's got the wild hemlock reishi. And we got a few of his tinctures here. An Amadou tincture with raspberries. Coolest thing about these tinctures is that they're all wild. This is the wild lion's mane. So I know I've been tasting it and it's delicious. But
well, without further ado, we know time is limited. We want to get as much into the hour as possible, which is why we did that pre-recording. Thanks for that chat that we had the other day. Lots of folks have taken that in, gotten to know who you are, and we're ready. This is definitely a highlight of the week for me to hear from you, followed by Tony Oakworth. What a great evening. We're just going to pass it over. We'll be monitoring the chat. We'll kind of circle around to questions and depending, I know you've got a little one in the house, but if you're able to stick around afterwards and join the Q&A, that'd be awesome as well. So, but without further ado, we better just pass this right over to you and let you take it away. But we're here for support, whatever you need. I think we figured out the tech and rock on, go.
Should be good. Okay, yeah, hi. I'm here. We're all still here?
Oh yeah.
I guess Malcolm's muting himself. Okay. Yeah, where to begin? The preview interview I did was I couldn't believe it was 40 minutes long, and I've had a lifelong history working with mycology. I was crazy about mushrooms since I was a little kid, and when I was a little kid, basically thought I was into collecting, things, and I wanted to have complete collections. Was kind of a pet peeve of trying to complete collection. So I figured that somehow someday I would be able to grow up and have the complete collection of knowing everything about mushrooms. And basically every year just realize, okay, well, I'm learning a lot more. And, you know, good 30 some years later, you know, 35 years later, I'm realizing, holy cow, there's no way to know everything about mushrooms. We're still just scratching the surface. And the main thing that really happened to me was realizing that, that there was medicinal mushrooms. I wasn't really interested in medicinal mushrooms, to tell you the truth, until I was battling with Lyme disease. So I basically I do concrete countertops too. I'm an artist, so my whole background is art in all kinds of different forms, and I'm really interested in functional art. So I like doing concrete countertops and sculpting with concrete. And I was in Nelson doing a really fancy countertop for a friend of mine, and I was doing a lot of foraging and prospecting, and it was in this basically from winter transitioning into spring. And I was running around prospecting, looking for cool different minerals and stuff, which you can find a lot of around there. And the ticks were coming out in the spring, and I've been bit by ticks before in Europe, and just, you know, got a tick bite here and there as a kid from messing around in the bush so much, but you know, never had a problem with it. But the next morning, I woke up feeling really woozy and like I had a flu. And I was also, because I was working so hard, my back was getting sore from doing all this concrete kind of stuff and bending over a whole bunch. So I was taking a bunch of ibuprofen, and so I was taking quite a bit of ibuprofen, and that made a huge difference, I found out, in my immune system, because inflammation is an immune response. And so in order for ibuprofen to basically make your inflammation go away, it represses your immune system. So you're a lot more likely to get an infection if you're, you know, taking a lot of these immunosuppressants for anti-inflammatory reasons. And I was like, no, I couldn't have got Lyme disease, because I did a little bit about it, but not very much. And I spent the next bunch of months getting more and more sore and feeling pretty gross, taking more anti-inflammatories, because I thought I had this bad inflammation problem, and essentially just got sicker and sicker and sicker, and was really going to see the doctor a whole bunch to try to figure out what the heck was wrong with me. And they figured I had an autoimmune disorder, and it was an arthritic or autoimmune disorder, because it had these like burning, stabbing pain, like migrating through all my joints and moving around my body. And it started in my sternum. I had a tick bite right here. And then a few days later in my sternum, I told my friend in Nelson, I said, I feel like I have little hamsters chewing holes into my collagen. And so like the connective tissue between where in my sternum and where my ribs to come together, I could feel that infection feeling. And literally the infection felt like little buggers like chewing holes into my collagen. And I found out much later, like 6-7 months later, that I was encouraged by a couple of friends to look into Lyme disease, because, you know, again, I didn't get a rash. So I didn't think like the bullseye rash associated from the tick bite, which normally indicates Lyme disease. I didn't get any rash or anything. But when I started looking into the symptoms of Lyme disease, I was blown away by it talking so much about what I was going through. And the doctor were going to put me on immunosuppressants, like stronger immunosuppressants called Humira. And so they wanted to suppress my immune system even more. And what I was really feeling was that I had this crazy infection, and they denied wanting to look for causes of an infection or you know, viral circumstances. I guess it would be hard to track down what kind of infection it would be, I suppose, because it does take a lot of different testing to get down to Lyme disease. And I didn't get the exact tests for Lyme disease, but Borrelia burgdorferi, one of the main characters of Lyme disease, is a spirochete bacteria. And they are like this corkscrew type of bacteria that burrow into your collagen. So the first symptoms I described feeling this infection, the little hamsters chewing holes into my collagen, was practically a microbiological diagnosis of literally what was going on inside my body. And my history with mushrooms was a lot more of like an artistic kind of thing. Like for me, I really loved hanging out in the forest. My grandparents took me mushroom foraging when I was little, and I wasn't super into like gourmet mushroom picking, but I loved mushrooms because they reminded me of the art of the forest in a way, like a funny little imaginary expression kind of popping out in a colorful way that just seemed imaginative compared to the other things in the forest were sort of, you know, beautiful, but not quite as cartoony or something, I guess you could say. Like, I mean, I guess when I was a kid, I also sort of romanticized the classic cartooniness of mushrooms, especially the Amanita muscaria, which was my totem, my spirit animal growing up. So ever since I was in grade 6, like my signature was muscaria. That's why I call myself Simon Muscaria a lot of time. And just fell in love with that mushroom very symbolically and spiritually. And so mushrooms also represented in a way to me the way that to connect with the imagination, which I kind of believe is through the third eye, through meditation, through the mental activation of getting to know your inner universe. And in a way, that's sort of like, you know, below the surface of the forest, like in the soil, the subconscious, the inner workings of like what's going on under the ground. And so mushrooms are this extent neural network, basically connecting everything and connecting all the trees. And, you know, not only they're connecting everything, but they're navigating and foraging themselves throughout their surroundings and digesting, recycling life, like that which decays never dies. Like mushrooms literally can live forever. They can just keep growing into a new substrate, and a mycelial mass has no reason necessarily to have age in a sense. It just renews itself into whatever new thing it grows into. And then the mushrooms were kind of like this inside out expression of the third eye, like into the regular world, and like looking up at the stars and looking like colorful, and they're kind of iris shaped, you know, and they kind of like with the gills and all these textures, they sort of reminded me of all the textures in the iris. And so to me, mushrooms were this imaginary third eye of the forest that was a way to spiritually and meditatively and imaginatively connect to the forest as a kid. So I grew up with that strong relationship, and I didn't really pay attention to the medicinal aspect or the gourmet aspect because, again, mushrooms were sort of my friends. They were like, you know, I'd go into different forests and find either new mushrooms or go back and find old mushrooms that, you know, come up every other year in different places. Like you could kind of see how they would actually grow into a different place within the forest and navigate around. And so they kind of became my friends, not really something again, medicinal mushrooms aren't necessarily often the quintessential, you know, umbrella shaped mushroom. So the only thing I sort of saw about medicinal mushrooms was I loved going into Chinatown in Edmonton and finding, the cool different mushrooms basically that were in the Chinese apothecary kind of things. And I always thought they were super fascinating, especially the reishi. It was hard to understand like what the heck this was, because it is a sort of a classic mushroom shape. It has so much beautiful geometry in it, but it's so like they dry out and they're so eternal. Like they just dry out and they can stay there forever if they don't get wet and bugs don't eat them. They'll last sort of forever. And so the Lyme disease, basically, when I started researching what to do about Lyme disease, I realized that it had everything to do with nutrition and boosting the immune system and flushing out the system. So I really was in so much pain I could barely really move or do anything. So I was pretty much sort of home ridden, difficult to get out of bed. So I basically just had a lot of time on my hands to do research to figure out what to do, and then ended up going to the grocery store and really loading up on all this what I call immuno ammo, and going to the health food store and loading up on immuno ammo. And I started noticing, holy cow, well, there's a heck of a lot more mushroom supplements than there used to be at the health food store. It had been a bunch of years since I, worried about going to the health food store very much. And so was just kind of blown away by how much more momentum the mushroom thing was picking up. And this was all in 2018. And then I fought off the Lyme disease in 2000, at the end of 2018. I got it in basically May, and it took until October, November till I figured out what was going on. And then December, I really was like stuck at home and basically just doing tons of fruit juicing, tons of vitamin C, and tons of supplements, and all kinds of cool mushrooms. And earlier that year, I was at Astral Harvest, and I met a really cool guy. And in one of the booths, his name's Keith Alembic, and he has a company called Phoenix Alchemy. And he had this really awesome mushroom booth. And so all these mushroom tinctures and all these mushroom specimens, and again, all the medicinal side. And this was still before I'd figured out that, you know, that I had this infection, that mushrooms would help fight it. But I was starting to learn and open about it. And he had this giant, amazing agarikon. And first time I'd ever seen an agarikon in the flesh. And he gave me a little piece, and I tasted a little piece of this agarikon and was blown away by like how a minuscule, tiny little smidge of dust from this thing had so much flavor, like packed such a huge, bittersweet symphony of a flavor punch. And I feel like that was a special initiation from the mushrooms, like this major sort of, if chaga is the king of mushrooms and reishi is the queen of mushrooms, and I sort of consider agarikon sort of the pope of the mushrooms. And I feel like I got a download from that agarikon, and that really helped me start realizing that I was needed to tune into another deeper dimension of my mycological relationship. And so I started stocking up on different mushroom supplements, and I also started making my own chaga tincture, because my partner at the time was big into making tinctures, and so I was helping her navigate that and designing labels and figuring out some of the sort of chemistry that goes into it. And I've always been interested in chemistry, but not to the level of like the biochemistry side of things that it takes to really, you know, extract plants and concentrate them. And it was all, you know, sort of new to me. And I really like approaching things thoroughly, artistically, but scientifically and pragmatically at the same time. So when I got into the rabbit hole of medicinal mushrooms, what really made the big difference was the fungal pharmacy, you know, Robert Rogers' book. And this new edition was at the health food store. And I never really got into the fungal pharmacy. Like, I know Robert Rogers from the Alberta Mycological Society ever since I was a kid, but the fungal pharmacy, you know, I wasn't really worried about pharmaceutical type of things, because I wasn't, you know, worried about my health so much until this incident. And this book was an awesome new addition that, you know, I was more interested in mushroom books as identification guides with lots of pictures. And this one now has lots of awesome pictures. And it's really talking about the mushrooms, you know, in our local forests here. And so that was the gateway for me into the mycoverse of the medicinal side of things, and heavily getting this download of feeling a strong calling back to the forest with a new perspective. And later so the beginning of 2019, I had overcome the Lyme disease. I had bounced back once I had really got into this regime of immuno ammo and really taking responsibility for my internal bio warfare, so to speak, of me versus, you know, my good guys and all the bacteria inside of me that are the good guys versus all these bad guys. That, you know, Lyme disease is a mix of fungi and bacteria and viruses, and essentially it becomes a cascade of infections, because each little piece starts taking more and more down on your immune system. So really boosting your immune system back. And as you fight these things, you also have to clean them out. It's not just like, sometimes when you really fight an infection, you can get what's called a Herxheimer reaction, which has a lot to do with toxins that gets released, or when your body kills bad bacteria, they become more toxic dead than they were alive, in the sense of they're rotting corpses in your system. So you got to flush them out. So I figured out how to do that, and pretty much saved my life, because I thought I was toast. Honestly, I was so crippled and messed up and in so much pain, I could not function. And I really have sympathy for people that have long-term Lyme disease and are fighting it. And for me, it built up really fast to the point of just couldn't do anything. So I was fighting for my survival. And it was a great learning experience. I really got to know how sensitive I was to myself. You know, especially even like with sugar, cutting out anything inflammatory. So when I cut out sugar for a while, I noticed how intense it was to just have a tiny little taste of anything sweet, and how much that evoked this crazy craving in me, and how I could how I could tell that the craving wasn't really me. It was like bacteria in my guts, like controlling my sense of goodness, and like a dopamine rush from eating sugar, and thinking that I like the sugar, but knowing that I was feeding these other guys that like the sugar, and that they can get out of control, and your immune system can get out of whack because of, you know, your diet. And so it was a great learning experience to have Lyme disease, and it was a weird near-death experience that taught me a lot, that was really painful, but I really did learn to appreciate it. And then in 2019, in the beginning of 2019, I started looking more for chaga, keeping my eye out for chaga, which is something I never really did before. And then I found this birch grove with a whole lot of chaga. And it was weird because chaga is supposed to be kind of rare, like maybe 1 in 1,000 birch trees. But there was every 5th or 10th birch tree had a little chaga on it. Or so it was sort of this infestation station of chaga. And I was like, why am I finding so much all of a sudden? Like, it's revealing itself to me in this interesting way. Like, it called me into this grove of chaga birch. And I got this download from the chaga. It told me, you know, foragers often follow this sort of sixth sense towards like mushrooms that they kind of hear in their subconscious, and then you find something, and it's like a surprise. Oh, I found that, but it's also not a surprise because it's just like, yeah, that's what I was looking for. Why did I even know that was there? And so there's a internal voice of the mushroom somehow that I can tune into. I guess it's not that you can hear it, but I just, you know, try not to expect it, but still be able to follow this sense of towards the mushrooms. And so chaga started telling me, make medicine out of us for your friends and family, antiviral medicine, because the surface, especially of chaga, the black part, is very antiviral. And this was around September 2019. And then I had no idea that it was going to be happening, but in November 2019, the movie Fantastic Fungi came out. And so that was super exciting because it's kind of Paul Stamets' like major debut into like real like public media. Like, Paul Stamets has been around for a while, but it's still a little more underground. Like, I've been crazy about Paul Stamets since I was a little kid. I actually, you know, when I was 12 years old, you know, back then there was no internet. It was a lot more about bookstores or libraries to find information about mushrooms, and the Alberta Mycological Society, which was something I didn't attend a lot, but I was at a very young age initiated into it. But Stamets was kind of my hero growing up, in the sense of like, literally when I was 12 years old in 1992 or 1993, I wanted to run away from home to try to get Paul Stamets to adopt me, because I just thought, this guy is like, you know, living in a world that's all mushrooms, and my life is just sort of based around mushrooms. And, you know, there's no course in school that you can take on mushrooms. And if I could just dedicate myself to mushrooms like this guy is, and work with him, then I would feel like I was, you know, really in the zone. And, you know, I love my family. I had an awesome family growing up and everything. I had no reason to like run away from home per se, but just a main, you know, mentor to connect with, especially before the internet, was tricky. And so I did end up like standing next to Paul Stamets in Burning Man in 2010, I think it was. And he had just given this lecture, and he was looking out over the playa, and just in this like mystical, magic, dreamy state that the playa can do to you out at Burning Man. And I didn't want to disturb him. I was just like, it looks like he's enjoying himself so much. I didn't want to like all of a sudden dump all of this, like, I finally found you. And so I let it go, and just had this faith that someday we would cross paths again when the time was right. And so the movie Fantastic Fungi came out, and Stamets in the movie says that in case of global pandemics, the old growth forests should be protected as a matter of national security. And that was November 2019. And then obviously 2020 rolls around, and I had just finished my first real batch of like a chaga extract that I was really proud of, and we have a community gathering called Intention, and so we had a little market booth at Intention. My first time having my own personal market booth in community, and selling these chaga tinctures, and everybody loved them, and a couple other medicinal mushrooms, but primarily chaga. And then obviously the whole pandemic started out, and I felt like, okay, so that's what the mushrooms were talking about. It started really making sense, like, whether it was just confirmation bias or coincidence or whatever, but at the same time, it was still just like, yeah, medicinal mushrooms are the thing that was a huge part of me learning how to battle my own viruses or bacteria, regardless of what it was. It's immuno ammo. These are really strong, like you are what you eat. And if you eat strong immune systems, then you become a strong immune system. If you eat durable molecules, you become, more durable molecules. And that on some level is what mushrooms are, because there's, especially the conchs that grow on the side of trees that are perennial, that live there for years and don't decay easily. They're essentially sterile sacks of water on the side of a tree, but the only defense they have is the biochemistry in their cell walls. So that started the rabbit hole of research, so to speak, into deep into the mycoverse. And so I really got into making extracts, and I will start this basically video that I made of my lab and what the Wild Mushroom Alliance has become, in the sense of how I collaborate with different foragers around the world, meeting new ones all the time, and in Alberta and everywhere I can connect with them, usually via like Instagram or Facebook, like seeing cool pictures that people post and being like, wow, can you send me some of these mushrooms, or can you forage for me, or can I work with you? So this is basically what I created as my lab. And you can see everything okay? The screen's showing up good?
Yeah, I think you're, at least on my screen, you're a little bit larger than the screen share.
That's what I would call it.
Oh, no, never mind. That's just mine. I can adjust. So yeah, Denise got a good view.
So this is John Lambert, and I'm dedicating this to John Lambert. He's one of my favorite foragers. He just passed away from a heart attack in March, and he was the gate to the Yukon for Yukon Amanita and Yukon Hericium. So basically, yeah, bless his soul. And there's his couch covered in Amanitas. And so follow me into the forest here as I take you on a bit of a forage as the mushroom Jedi, looking for medicinal mushrooms. And I love going with my family and my friends out foraging. Obviously, here's Denis and rocking out, and here's my buddy Steve. And as much as possible, we get out and basically forage when the foraging is good. And survival of the fittest, sure, but survival of the foragist, in a way, like survival's a prerequisite of being wild is foraging. Like every organism essentially is foraging, besides humans, for their survival. Even the plants are foraging with their roots. Even the mycelium, it's all foraging for nutrients. Everything's searching to digest something else, and there is no waste in nature. In nature, everything is food. And obviously we forage blueberries too, and there's the blueberry baby. And nettle. So not just mushrooms, whatever's the perfect picking. And pine pollen, really went hardcore in pine pollen last year. And these are all like mushrooms are essentially the fruits of mycelial network. Pollen and pine cones are the fruit of trees. Flowers are and fruit are an amazing aspect of what biodiversity produces as nutrient density. And so we also make jewelry out of some of the gem grade pine cones or mushrooms that we find, and hydrosols as well a bit. And Baby loves helping stuff hydrosols. So foraging not only for just medicinal mushrooms, but it expanded to anything beautiful. So back into like foraging. Now I entertain when I find them, chanterelles and interesting other gourmet mushrooms, but primarily still looking for reishi. Really is what I'm looking for. Turkey tail, hericium, so different strains of hericium. Lion's mane is really hard to find in the wild, but there is a bunch of other amazing other hericium species that we're looking into, and we're pretty sure that they have the similar compounds. But reishi is essentially sort of the most exciting thing to find sometimes. And there's all kinds of different sizes of reishi. Those are both organenses from the West Coast. And then obviously agarikon too. Agarikon is the pope of the forest and one of the most rarest. And luckily I have a whole bunch of agarikon. I got it out of Russia before it was hard to get out anymore now. But yeah, reishi. I know Yarrow did probably a really cool talk on reishi the other day. I haven't seen it yet, but this is Phenellus, growing on birch typically, and there's birch polypore. So these are all from Western Canada. There's Amadou, also from birch. That's Amazonian reishi. That's East Coast reishi. That's tsuge. So this is all on my porch basically, and I'll get a shipment. Like this is just one I got today and unpacked actually from the Ukraine. There's a bunch of auricularia and a whole bunch of amazing Amanita muscaria. And so not only do I try to make sure that my forager friends send me awesome medicinal mushrooms, but also really cool specimens. And some of them I don't even know what they are yet. I haven't had a chance to identify them, but basically in love with mushrooms, not only collecting for medicinal properties, but now making awesome herbariums to collect for specimens and to make jewelry out of even. And there's almost 10 kilos of little Amazonian reishi. So I make a really interesting tincture called Spirit Weaver, which is from four different reishis from the four corners of Turtle Island. Amazonian reishi, West Coast reishi, which is the organenses, East Coast, which is tsuge, and then applanatum, which is the artist conch, which is the sort of more central from Alberta. And these are all bags of essentially all kinds of different polypores, or that's a whole bunch of turkey tail there. And eventually, basically, sorting out all of these mushrooms, identifying them, quality controlling them, going through and seeing if any of them are sort of gem grade, so to speak, in the sense of awesome for making some jewelry or art with. And then otherwise getting things into queue for processing and then storage and then extracting. And then the extractions basically to get to know the mushrooms. I really like doing very high quality concentrated extractions of each mushroom by themselves, and then getting to know the inside of the mushroom. Like, what is a mushroom really made out of? Like, when we think about mushrooms for the sake of medicinal, here's a bunch of amazing diamond willow mushroom. And this is a sacred Native American smudge, makes a very amazing, tasty tincture. And there's a whole bunch of stored mushrooms. There's my herbarium of mushroom specimens. And I work with passion flower too. So I like mixing passion flower with amanita and actual passion flower and blue lotus. Ginseng, it's grown in the forest actually. There's some cultivated lion's mane. And of course, amanita. Amanita is a huge up and coming dimension basically. And I'm sorting through tons of amanita. I'm quality controlling every mushroom and then processing it and vac packing it. And here's my freezers full. And then this is getting into basically the extraction process. So getting the soxolates ready, but they're called cymoxalates now because they're custom kind of version. And then weighing out the mushrooms. There's some agarikon going into the large filter. There's some organenses reishi going into the filter. I take it outside to stuff it into the filter because it is pretty dusty. Then vac pack everything back up, make sure the air is out of it and good and sealed up, and back into the freezer so can keep everything as fresh as possible. And even though that looks like a lot of mushrooms going into there, I mean, it is. There's about 400 to 500 grams per sort of filter barrel. And this is the beginning of doing the alcohol extraction. And I do my alcohol extraction first at basically room temperature or like basement room temperature, so kind of cold. And it's a, I just believe that I don't really like, especially for the fine molecules is what I call them, in the sense of the alcohol soluble ones. I don't like overheating them. I don't like exposing them to any more heat than they would otherwise experience, being alive in nature. And so I normally, I started out doing tinctures by like trying to grind up mushrooms and then putting them in jars and shaking them around with the alcohol, letting them sit and soak for a while. But I always wondered, like, how much more alcohol can I put in here? How much more stuff can I get out of them? And the problem, the more alcohol you use for a tincture, the kind of, if you don't have a way to concentrate and recover your alcohol, then you kind of get stuck with a lot of alcohol. And I'm using basically 90% approximately alcohol. And this is, as the alcohol flows through the filter, basically flows out the bottom and then starts building up. And this is how a soxylate normally works, is that in the bottom there's a heater, and you'll see later there's an active soxylate that I was using before, but they weren't functioning great, especially at these large volumes. And I just ended up using them passively. So I contacted the makers and I was like, can I just get Erlenmeyer flasks with a valve on the bottom and a modified lid for this other equipment that I have, so that I can use these passively. And so basically, once the alcohol builds up, then it overcomes the siphon and drops down into the Erlenmeyer flask. And now essentially I have this big fancy filter jar that I can wash my finely powdered mushrooms. It's all about surface area, like opening up as much surface area as possible. So I use a hammer mill to powder the mushrooms after I've sliced them, so I can feed them into the hammer mill, and wash them with alcohol rather than just let them sort of soak in the alcohol. This is all obviously very sped up. Like this agaricon is such a fine powder that it took over 2 days for the alcohol just to soak through. And so low temperature alcohol extraction, and just keep running it until the pigment stops happening. And so however much alcohol it takes to basically wash out all the pigment. And that's the same way that you run a soxylate. But the thing is, a soxylate is constantly, even under vacuum, like it's still heating up to around at least 40 degrees Celsius. And now I can just hook up a tube straight into my Rotovape vacuum feed and directly suck right out of the Erlenmeyer flask, my fancy Simoxylate jar, into the Rotovape. And instead of heating the alcohol and all that mushroom chemistry consistently to evaporate the alcohol and have it drip down like a classic soxylate, now I can basically just concentrate the alcohol at even like I turn up the hot water bath to maybe 33 degrees, but inside the liquid is only, high 20s. So it's just, a nice warm summer day basically inside of there, for the sake of like the temperature that the chemistry is getting exposed to. And then I can recover my solvent. So I recover, again, about 90% alcohol comes back out nice and pure, and I get a super concentrate mushroom extract. And then the exciting part is that once I started making these super concentrated alcohol mushroom extracts, I basically concentrate, let's say there's 500 grams of mushroom material in there, and it takes maybe 15 liters of alcohol to 20 liters of alcohol, 90%, to wash it out until all the pigment comes out. And I have I've thoroughly washed everything alcohol soluble out of the mushrooms, and then concentrate that all the way down to maybe only like 100 mils or 300 mils at most, and keep those 100 mil increments basically in baby food jars. And you can see here I'm just recovering basically the ethanol again, able to just pour it back in the top again. So it's like a passive soxylate, and it's also a lot more energy efficient, in the sense of like heating up a soxylate and cooling all it down is a heck of a lot of energy. And the heaters for soxylates can be kind of stinky too sometimes for some of the cheaper Chinese ones. And so it's a great way to not be using so much energy, and also sort of semi-soak the mushrooms in alcohol and just have a nice be able to run a whole bunch of them without using a whole bunch of energy. Here's agaricon concentrating in the rotavape, and look at how the bubbles sort of like disappear in clusters. Like that's not even sped up, just weird. Agaricon is one of the strangest mushrooms by far. Here's my old setup with a Chinese rotavape instead of the Buchi, which is a Swiss one, and the Swiss ones are way more efficient. This was a decent Chinese one my friend was lending me, and this is a way a soxolite normally runs. So it's you can see also with these glass filters, they're nice filters, but tons of the alcohol that condensates runs down the side and doesn't make it into the filter, therefore totally wasting the energy by evaporating the alcohol, having it go up to drip down into the filter, normally washing the mushrooms, but instead running down the side. So running the soxolates normally, I just noticed wasn't very efficient, and that's what got me into retrofitting them into what now I call cymoxylates for fun. And so that's agaricon. And I just didn't like how much it was heating up, and especially with cordyceps, like you don't want to heat up cordyceps. And so cordyceps is crazy how much pigment they can give off. And there's the baby food jars of concentrating, and there's the babies where the baby food jars came from. And chlorophyll is pretty crazy sometimes to deal with. Luckily, when you concentrate it, it seems to collapse out. There's pine pollen, really strong pine pollen tincture, and there's looking at the pine pollen under the microscope, and you can see what they look like intact, and then you can see in the tincture there's barely any. So the yellow sediment isn't actually pine pollen, it's the inside of pollen. And this is the concentrated, basically alcohol extract. So I let this alcohol extract super concentrate, super saturate, sit for a week or two. And there's sort of the first wash, second wash, and third wash. And there's the first wash, and you can see little tiny dots forming on the glass. Now, those are little seed crystals. And this is the first crystals that I found. It blew me away. Those were turkey tail, 2 different types of crystals out of turkey tail the first time. And here's other crystals out of turkey tail, literally crystals forming on the inside of these baby food jars. Blew my mind. These amazing pure mushroom compounds of some sort were growing inside the jars. And here's my collection of over like 20 or 30 different mushrooms I've extracted. And there's even more than one crystal that comes out, in oils and fats and waxes. And so when you do these concentrates, everything kind of precipitates out sometimes. And well, different compounds precipitate out when you get a super saturate, because they like, especially with crystals, they like all sticking together. And if you let it sit for long enough, it grows crystals. And so here's my collection of pure mushroom crystals under the microscope. Those ones are from turkey tail. This is from turkey tail's cousin, Ochraceae. This is from Macema, or Phenellus lintus or Angaris. That's reishi crystals. And resinosum mushroom, which is a really interesting resinous polypore. So I've been sort of being able to identify different mushrooms via these different crystal formations. These are mazegill polypores from my backyard. Sometimes they have a heck of a lot of crystals, and sometimes they don't hardly have any crystals. And there's very distinct different formations that these crystals form under. So they're definitely not just like one type of crystal coming out of all mushrooms in sort of one main compound. I haven't had a chance to connect with a lab to measure and figure out what these crystals actually are yet, but that's on the way. That's my tacky. And then so after the alcohol extraction comes the water extraction. So this is where I do use heat, but typically only maybe 60 to 70 degrees Celsius at most. And now I'm not afraid of heating the stuff up, because really now all I'm trying to do is break down the chitin. And so the chitin breaks down a lot easier with some heat, and it's very water soluble. And so basically just heating up and stirring the mushroom powder after the alcohol has been extracted, and I press all the extra alcohol out in my tincture press, you'll see later. And basically the polysaccharides are bound up in the cell walls of the mushroom. So it doesn't really take much heat to start degrading the chitin and releasing the polysaccharides. And there's a magnetic stirrer in there, whipping around of that diamond willow, basically the water extract from diamond willow. And it's sometimes really interesting to see the fascinating sort of patterns that form out of every mushroom. when you start taking it apart, all of a sudden has all this internal chemistry story that's going on. So, everybody thinks about mushrooms and medicinal mushrooms, but it's really the target chemistry in mushrooms that we're interested in. And all mushrooms are not equal, even though they're the same mushrooms. So now it comes to filtering. And filtering can be tricky sometimes. So, all these mushrooms have different amounts of fats and waxes and stickiness and jelliness. And so you got to really get creative with trying to create effective ways of filtering the water back out of some of the mushrooms that really suck up the water. And some of them release it really easily. That's lion's mane, for instance. And it takes a heck of a lot of time and effort to filter the water back out. Sometimes actually centrifuge it out. And then once I'm finished, basically the first wash, sometimes it can take up to 2, like chaga, it took almost 10 washes, like in the sense of like 5 liters for 500 grams. And there's me with my tincture press, squishing the heck out of the mushrooms in the filter container in order to press out the water. And basically that thing, you can't really hardly make good tinctures without a really decent press like this, because it's super hard to squish your menstruum back out of your mark. And then filter it again just to make sure there's no particles in there. And so that was all just distilled water that I used originally to wash the mushrooms with. And you can see how much intense pigment it picked up again, even though I'd washed out so much pigment. I basically, there was no more alcohol soluble aspect of the pigment, but then there's still a bunch of water soluble aspect of this other pigment, and tons of polysaccharides. And so this water is super duper saturated in long chain sugar molecules that are part of the sort of polymer kind of structures that make up the cell walls of these mushrooms. And this is agarikon water extract. And agarikon never ceases to amaze me. This is this crazy like mica kind of effect that the agarikon had. Looks like the surface of the sun. And that's just the polysaccharide, basically, polysaccharides in suspension in water from agarikon. The most beautiful extraction by far. So who knew this kind of magic was hidden inside agarikons? And then the thing that happens with combining then the alcohol extract and the water extract is, you can see that dark red was a turkey tail extract, and turkey tail comes out if it's true turkey tail, it comes out as a dark pink. And then in the alcohol extract, and then when you add the water extract, which is usually like a light beige or yellowy kind of orange color, when you add the water extract with all the polysaccharides into the alcohol kind of like kicks the polysaccharides into precipitating. And so there's only so much essentially polysaccharides in so much alcohol percentage. I try to mix it, my volumes to take my 90% alcohol extract and turn it into a 25% water, 25% alcohol and 75% water. And then you can see what happens is that this is a 25% tincture now, and the polysaccharides are precipitating out like snow. This is a time lapse, so it's sped up. And it comes in different forms. Like there's a reishi, I forget what that, I think that's a bear's head. And then this is another time lapse of basically, this is polysaccharides doing their thing, precipitating out of solution. And if you get a good tincture, usually it'll have some polysaccharides in the bottom. It'll be a little bit cloudy, but not so much that there's so much polysaccharides that essentially settles as a mud cake in the bottom of the tincture bottle and clogs the dropper, which can be tricky. And so here's Amanita muscaria polysaccharides precipitating. And I thought it was so strange to watch this stuff, because at first I was like, what? I didn't really know for sure it was polysaccharides. It took me a while to kind of really wrap my mind around that. And I was really wondering what the heck is going on, that there's so much of this stuff falling out of solution, but it doesn't hardly add up. Like if you look at where it's falling at the bottom, it's very weird, like super fine snowflakes, in the sense of adding up, but not raising the level very much. So they're sort of like collapsed down. And this is another extract out of Amanita, some fatty, maybe spores is what I was wondering what they might be. And so here's the mud after I separate it off. So that's just pure polysaccharides from turkey tail, for instance. And so in a settling funnel, this polysaccharide settle down to the bottom, then I pour off a certain amount, basically dried up to make mushroom mud or mushroom hash, and then mix it with honey. So I make basically, it's a good way to utilize the polysaccharides into a honey base, and then not have to, they taste great, even though they look kind of weird. So then I'm bottling a bunch of tincture out of it and then making labels. And then here's the lineup of, some of the tinctures I've made so far. And basically all wild mushrooms. Sometimes I get grown cordyceps and sometimes some grown lion's mane. And then I'm out at markets so far. I'm trying to get the website finished and up and running, but it's been a heck of a lot of work just doing all this different stuff and research in general. And I'm really trying to do a thorough website. So it's not just the basic one. And then if I could choose only a few mushroom tinctures, it'd be easier. But I'm doing so many different ones. And then I focus specifically also on Amanita muscaria. And I'm a bunny, I think, is where the Amanita muscaria started for me too. And then, Aurelia started with Amanita muscaria at a very early age, as you can see. So here's me finding Amanitas. This is one of the best crops that I've ever found. That's just a few from thousands of maybe hundreds of super beautiful Amanitas in Vancouver that I found a couple years back. So Amanitas on the brain all the time. And doing Amanita extract is extra tricky because you want to decarb the ibotenic acid. So I spent a lot of time watching concentrates drip and basically figuring out Amanita chemistry is a whole other ball of wax unto itself. And there's a salve that I make and the tinctures that I make, super high quality, beautiful Amanita tincture and a pipe smoke blend. And then I also work on a project in a lab doing HPLC testing, as you can see here, and to test for ibotenic acid and muscimol to find out, so how much of this active chemistry is in these extracts that I'm making. And there's a whole list of different Amanitas from around the world. And these are all different, basically HPLC results of the peaks of the chemistry that is showing up in different samples of Amanita. And yeah, tons of Amanita I'm always sorting through. And there's my little Amanita gangster. So live long and prospore. That is the end of my lab presentation. So how do I get back out of here now?
Holy, that was awesome, Simon. Yeah, you had us all speechless here watching that. Just absolutely incredible.
Cool. So there's the lab in the Mushroom Jedi lab in a nutshell there.
Yeah, right on. Well, definitely we had some questions come through. A lot of comments, exclamation marks. Yeah, all right. Well, let's kind of run through a couple of questions. Denis, you were fielding some of those there. So Wendy C asked, what are the medicinal benefits of diamond willow fungus? And as you answer that, I'll kind of scroll back up and catch some of the earlier ones.
Well, it's antiviral, especially against the COVID strains of viruses. And it can help with headaches. It seems to have like vascular dilation properties is what I'm guessing, because that is what I've sort of felt. People burn it and smell the smoke in order to take in the chemistry that way, and it helps to cure headaches, migraine headaches. So it also can help with earaches. So for some people, taking the diamond willow tincture can help with that type of thing, but it's very most of the conchs are all very anti-cancerous, antiviral. And so it's one that I work with very carefully, because it's a bit more of a rare mushroom, and it's one of the most sacred mushrooms because it is a Native American sacred smudge.
Cool. All right. Well, I've got a question that kind of wraps a couple all together. And so Kathy says, mind blowing. How did you learn to do all of this? And my kind of comment question is related to your self-diagnosis, right? Where you be able to feel in, like you said, you tapped into what was really going on at a biomolecular level through your own I don't know, intuition, but I guess the question where I'm going to lead in, how much have mushrooms played a role in you coming to this? Not only your own personal diagnosis and journey through that, but then also into the alchemy and everything that you just showed us.
When you say mushrooms, I'm almost assuming like you mean like doing psychedelics and like connecting that way, or what do you, in the sense of?
Yeah,
like,
honestly, like doing psychedelics is obviously kind of a really overt, like, okay, like you're getting the download. But I think for you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think it even goes beyond that, right? It's a deeper relationship, and it's not just the psychedelic ones. You've tapped into.
It's the process of connecting to nature, and then really listening. Like, to me, like, the reason I'm sort of self-proclaimed biomolecular mycologist, in the sense of I'm trying to decode the language of nature through the chemistry, which is to me sort of the alphabet on some level. Like, it gets into the quantum side of that, so it's even beyond just the molecules. But essentially, nature is communicating primarily through pheromones and chemistry, and then the way it's just basically a fascination with what makes a mushroom medicinal or not medicinal, and how to get to know the inside of mushrooms. And then with my own sensitivity, it wasn't so much intuition. Like, at first my intuition was that I didn't have Lyme disease, but I could feel it was actually literally like a high resolution sensation of what felt like hamsters chewing holes into my collagen. And that was one of the first times. I mean, I feel a lot of people try to ignore pain. Like, I was taking a bunch of ibuprofen to try to escape the pain, but you can also go into it if you feel like you need to, and become more sensitive to yourself. And I think of Vipassana, like meditation, and really practicing feeling myself in a deep internal sense of like, what am I made of? And then connecting to that helped me connect more to that deeper internal part of mushrooms too, because I was still connecting to mushrooms sort of in a superficial, in the sense of artistic and spiritual being superficial, in the sense of like the surface kind of seeing mushrooms and appreciating them for their beauty and their sort of mysticism, rather than, okay, wait a second, what is this as an actual functional aspect of chemistry? And then it gets really interesting to like, what's the difference between mushrooms grown in sterile environments, which is what they need to be done, typically to grow them, and how does that affect the mushroom's chemistry versus in a wild mushroom? And so I'm very interested in starting to figure out how to analyze this and build research and a body of work of just what is the proof in the pudding about mushrooms, rather than just this whole sort of like, mushrooms are exciting because they're, this underground thing kind of that, normally you were kind of a freak because you were interested in mushrooms. And now if you're interested in mushrooms, you're super relevant. And so it was kind of, I think it's just the world waking up. And I feel like I've been sensitive to it for a long time, but it didn't really matter as much as now all of a sudden it super matters. And so I've just really dived into figuring this all out. Like, I didn't learn it from somewhere. I don't have a mentor in chemistry or anything like that. Or I literally was just, how do you practically deal with taking apart mushrooms and getting the chemistry out as friendly to the chemistry as possible?
Yeah, beautiful.
Right on. I think you just answered Kathy's question here about, she was asking if you have a background in biochemistry or physiology.
I have a background in all kinds of things. I have a background in whatever I Google or whatever I go to the library and find, essentially. Like, I love the rabbit hole of research. Like, I'm an artist, but I'm very artful at researching and figuring out and getting into the fine details and being ingenuitive with what I'm doing. And so that has everything to do with applying my artistic inspiration and my creative inspiration into very pragmatic, practical explorations of figuring out, and especially connecting with nature and trying to essentially make sure that we have another future level of making nature more meaningful. And especially, like, the premise of the Wild Mushroom Alliance is to help the forest, help people, help the forest, which means reevaluating the value of forests, not to see them as forests, see them as ecosystems, not to cut them down for lignins, but keep them growing, whether it's an old growth or a new growth, or, sustainably forest in a way that acknowledges all the different organisms and the way that the chemistry correlates to our consciousness, and then even correlates to the cosmos, and the way that the whole ecosystem of our solar system and all these planetary influences, because that's the background of alchemy, is this deep, meaningful connection to all the different dimensions of nature and this super crazy magical surface area that we all have to explore. It's really all about surface area. And that's what art is too. Art is like, how do you make a surface area beautiful? And so what is already beautiful, and how can you look into the deeper level down the rabbit hole of the fractal of the universe's surface area? And that is my muse. That is my inspiration.
Yeah, super cool. What do you think is this connection to, mushrooms and intelligence? Like, obviously fungi, it's a kingdom that possesses like deep ancient intelligence. And a friend of mine, he sent me a little article about kids who are interested in dinosaurs tend to have a higher IQ. And I think the same would be for mushrooms, right? You go to like an Alberta mycological meeting, like there's some really nerdy, intelligent dudes that like, and women as well, obviously, that get into this.
My other library is all dinosaurs. They have a whole dinosaur book collection and tons of dinosaur bones. So basically I either forage into the contemporary and futuristic side of mushroom exploration, and then into the past when I find dinosaur bones all shattered into pieces, and then I like bringing them home, all the broken surface pieces that I can find, and gluing them back together. And I feel like I'm putting back together like ancient parts of myself. Like it's an interesting meditation of being like able to connect with like ancient snapshots of organisms buried in mud for millions of years, and then be like, this is the same bone as I have in my body. Like dinosaurs have all the same bones that we have in our body. So it's this constant fractal unfolding of intelligence. Nature is a very mystical form of intelligence. And then again, it comes down to all of this, the exploration of novelty within surface area.
I wonder if there was reishi mushrooms kicked around in the dino times, and if they were chowing on them.
Reishi Rex.
It does. Reishi, like the giant reishi we've got in the Light Cellar, reminds me so much of Jurassic Park, eh?
Yeah,
like
Aplanadodon.
Right.
Well, Simon, we're so grateful and glad to have had you on the symposium. You're such a big part of this for the last 3 years or so, and we're looking forward to, well, we do have Simon's tinctures here in the Light Cellar. We got his lion's mane.
Yeah, I'm actually going to bring a bunch more in tomorrow. I have Amanita is always sold out. I have a very special Amanita batch. There's only 28 bottles of Brazilian Amanita and Norwegian Amanita together in one bottle.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, right on. So we'll and we're looking forward to maybe one day seeing your website. Hey, well, one day we'll let everyone know about that. In the meantime,
in the meantime, we'll follow up with all the kind of notes and resources that we have for you. And folks can follow you on Instagram, they can connect to your website. And it's awesome. So thanks so much. We're going to, if you want, I know you've got family and children, but if you're able to stick around after Tony's presentation, we'll kind of we'll have a little bit more time for Q&A. So if you're around, we might find some questions your way. Otherwise, we're going to turn this over to Tony Oakworth.
Live long and prosper.
All right. Right on, man. Thank you so much.